Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. We have Jodi Ray with the Kid Care program on with us today, and we'll be talking politics as usual.
A part of the Lawton and Rhea Child's Center for Healthy Mothers and Babies. It's become a statewide outreach program, which we think is very important, named after the late governor and, of course, his wife. So we'll invite you to pull up a chair and put an ear on the radio. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst and raconteur Al Spry. It's so good to be with you again, Reagan. I'd like to tell you about my favorite website.
Okay.
It's called myflanews.com.
Yeah.
The reason why it's my favorite website, not only does it have Florida Roundtable archives on it, that's my favorite show, by the way. I'm a little biased, just slightly. But you can also get up to date with the latest news and views from Florida and around the country and beyond by going to myflanews.com.
And but the point we might hasten to add is do it after you have finished listening to this program. Okay?
Absolutely.
We wouldn't want you to miss any pearls of wisdom.
No, because the pearls are flowing, my friend. They are flowing.
It's going to be a good day, yes.
We're going to start with, because we're going to have Jodi Ray on, talking about kids' care and medical coverage for children. Let's start with a medical story. So there's a pro-Obamacare group which plans a pushback in Florida. It's called Enroll America. It's a group helping to educate people about the new health care law, which the Republicans are still trying to defund, and now has 27 staffers on the ground in Florida. This illustrates how important the state is to the overall viability of Obamacare. I guess Florida, third largest state now. So there's this Florida State Director, Nick Duran. He said in a conference call that volunteers have begun making connections with nonprofit healthcare groups to spread the word, so to speak. One man went on a Haitian radio show in Miami to discuss the law and got more than 20 phone calls from people wanting to know more. So they're going in Spanish and Creole and English and covering the state here.
Yeah, what I saw was that they'd come up with about $10 million, and they claimed to have 3,000 volunteers across the states who are principally dominated by the GOP that, of course, has been resistant to the creation of the Obamacare. So that's they are in with us. Of course, now the president himself, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, gave big business a pass here on being ready for it this October. They now have until 2015. But you and I, my friend, you and I, who are not corporate tycoons and don't own huge companies, we still have to be prepared to go in October. I also note that our friends in the United States Senate and the House about went into cardiac arrest when they discovered that they were going to have to be a part of Obamacare, and there wasn't going to be this federal, dare I call it, a slush fund that would take care of it for them. You know, the Congress has never had to participate in Social Security and Medicare, and those things that they created for the general American public, they have never had to participate in. And guess what? Charles Grassley, he saw this. Well, if it's good enough for the American people, it's good enough for the Congress. Oh, no. Harry Reid about had a heart attack. So the Congress has managed to weasel its way out even as we speak.
Well,
thank you once again.
Of course, I always like to quote that Bush speechwriter that we had on a few years ago. I can't remember his name, but I could always remember his quote that the Congress of the United States is the last vestiges of 17th century. What was it? 17th century Oh shoot! Now I'm forgetting.
Well,
it had to do with they think that their stuff doesn't stink. In other words, that there's a class system and they're at the top of the heap. Of course, it escapes me, but it has to do with remember all the people that they beheaded in France?
Yes.
That class. The aristocracy. That's the word, Reagan.
Yeah.
These are the last vestiges of 17th century aristocracy.
Well,
when you get chauffeured around and go to the nicest restaurants on the taxpayer's dole and get all these perks, and you get retirement after 2 terms in the House, and you get retirement after a term in the Senate, already vested in. What do you need with these silly laws that everyone else has to follow, right, Reagan?
Just preceding the French Revolution, they referred to the aristocracy in France as the Bourbons. And many people see what goes on in the United States today in that same kind of light. It happened to us just after the Civil War. They out of touch with the general public, and the Bourbon aristocracy. Interesting. Well, tell you what, let us take a pause along the network line. We'll remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
We'll be joined by Jodi Ray, and we'll talk about Florida covering kids and families as our conversation continues. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, as promised at this point in the program, we are off to the Tampa Bay area, where we are joined by Jodi Ray. Jodi is the project director of the Florida Covering Kids and Families, the Lawton and Rhea Child Center for Healthy Mothers and Babies. We'll spit it out there. This is part of the College of Public Health at the University of South Florida. And boy, is that a mouthful. But Jodi, welcome to the Florida Roundtable.
Thank you.
Yes. However, Jodi Ray is very easy to say. So
yes.
we'll just roll with that.
It's Florida Covering Kids and Families. But Jodi, before we get into all that, how about taking the first minute and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how it is you came to be involved in this?
Well, I started working when we wrote the original proposal to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, right about the time, shortly after passing the S-CHIP program, which is the State Children's Health Insurance Program, which is the federal program that to cover kids who were not eligible for Medicaid. And Robert Wood Johnson Foundation came up with this idea that we needed to find those kids that would now be eligible for S-CHIP. And so I really came on board back in 1998, about the beginning of all of that. And I've been doing this ever since. We've had a lot of changes to the program, but at the time, I came on to help coordinate efforts at the local level, and now I direct outreach for the state. And a lot of efforts around the state.
Well, now, exactly what does Florida Covering Kids and Families do?
Sure. Florida Covering Kids and Families is we're a program, like you said, within the College of Public Health that focuses on the public health issue of access to health care and health coverage. So we work very hard to engage all kinds of partners, and we train people, and we work on administrative policies and anything that may impact children getting access to coverage. So primarily we've been focusing on what we call the Florida Kid Care Program, which is our children's CHIP and Medicaid program combined. And we also do enrollment. Work one-on-one with families and make sure they understand how to get coverage, of why it's important, and help them get through the process so those kids actually get the coverage they need, so they have access to the necessary health care services.
Now, you said earlier that the coverage programs have changed. Would you say over the years since 1998, you started doing this with through the as a research coordinator at the Child Center? How has the changes been? Have they been for the better, for the worse? Is it more challenging now? Are you finding more uninsured kids? How exactly has things changed?
Well, there's a lot to what you just said. I mean, first of all, things have not always changed for the better, and then they've gotten better. We've had the history that has resulted in a lot of kids losing coverage at one time quite a few years ago. But subsequent to that, a lot of improvements have been made to the program. Significant amount of improvements have been made to the program, like, making sure that the online application, for example, is accessible to anyone who can get to a computer. It's not, that you need to be with somebody to help you do it. They're in multiple languages. The process has gotten easier. They try to do with where they can, verifying information without actually having to ask the family to provide additional information. So the improvements, along with the significant amount of outreach efforts that have gone on to try to find the kids that need the program, have really resulted in quite a significant drop in enrollment. Uninsured. In Florida. I mean, we've gone for almost 800,000 kids that were uninsured in Florida around 2008, and now we're under 500,000. So we are making strides. We still have a pretty high target. However, we are making dents in it because of the improvements that continuously are putting into place.
So now, is this part of the Florida Kid Care, the Back to School campaign? You're trying to reach out to those, to that large group?
Right. So we always kind of I always call back to school our tax season, because it's one of our busiest times of year for this kind of work, because parents are busy thinking about all the things they need to do to get their kids ready for school. They're thinking of things like immunizations and physicals. The kids might be participating in sports, back to school supplies and clothes and all that stuff. So it's a great time to get their attention. You might think they've got too much going on, but we insert the getting your children enrolled into that mix. It's not, we now have to go over here to do that. No, we come to where they are doing all of that. We go to the immunization fairs. We go to the back to school events. We go do all of these things where these parents are already paying attention to all of the balls that they have in the air to get their kids ready. And we encourage and help them to make sure that those kids are also going back covered.
Now, of course, that you said things have improved. 800,000 kids in 2008, now 500,000 uninsured kids. But 500,000 uninsured kids in Florida still sounds like a lot. Why is that? Why are there so many uninsured children still in Florida?
Well, I mean, there's probably not one answer to that. Mm-hmm. We have a diverse population, so there's a lot of nuances to communicating to parents about something like health coverage when you're working with diverse populations. There are cultural issues that you have to take into consideration that make it challenging. There are language barriers. There are literacy issues. I mean, you can't tell everybody in any corner of the state to go log on and go fill out an application. So it takes a lot of time and a human resource to go out there and go into these communities, go where transportation might be an issue, and sit down and help these families complete the application and get their children enrolled. So it's not something that always just occurs very simply, and so it can be timely to be able to do it, especially when you're dealing with some of the nuances that we have in a state like Florida. I mean, we're geographically big, and demographically we're very diverse.
I want to stress the nuts and bolts of this, because folks are listening and they're saying, well, that all sounds very fine, but again, Florida Kid Care, why should they bother? What does it do? I mean, we need to stress those for our listeners.
Yes, well, the great thing about Florida Kid Care is that, first of all, it's free or low-cost insurance for almost every uninsured child in the state up till they turn 19. So looking at those numbers, we have a program like Florida Kid Care for them. It's and when you're talking about what does it provide, how do they cover these kids, you're talking about checkups to transplants. Literally, you're talking about dental, vision, immunizations, prescriptions, hospitalizations, regular doctor visits. It's so comprehensive. These children are covered head to toe. Behavioral health care, all kinds of mental health and emotional health care is provided and included as well. So it's very comprehensive, and we know the other reason we've tied it so much to this back-to-school theme is that, kids who have access to health care are healthier because they're using appropriate health care. I mean, if you look at a child, for example, that may have asthma, if a child with asthma has a medical home and is treated for that asthma appropriately, they're healthier. They're not going to the emergency room for asthma attacks as part of a treatment program. And then they do better in school because they're healthy. They feel good. They're sitting in the classroom. They can focus. They can see. They can hear the teacher. The parents also have peace of mind knowing they don't have to worry. If something does happen, I can take my child to a doctor. I have some place I can go, and I will be able to afford it.
What is the website? How do people sign their children up if they want to get their children signed up? This is a free service, yes?
To go and do an application?
Yes.
Yes.
And what is the website?
The website is www.floridakidcare.org.
floridakidcare.org. Okay, yes. Great. I want to also ask you, with the upcoming Obamacare coming up next year, how does this jibe with that, and how is that going to work?
So that's an opportunity also for us to increase enrollment for kids, too, because if we have a place to be able to offer parents to get coverage, right now we know a lot of these kids, if they're uninsured, the parents are uninsured as well. But we also know on the flip side of that, if the parents have coverage and are insured, the kids will get coverage and stay insured. So it's a win-win for the entire family, quite frankly. So that's an opportunity for us to reach more children by making sure these parents know that this information is out there, that they're going to be able to enroll in coverage. The other nice thing is that eventually, parents won't have to apply using multiple applications. And they'll be able to, if their child is eligible for CHIP, they'll be able to do that all on the same application as the one that they're going to use for the exchange. So somewhere down the line, that is eventually going to be what the reality is for families as they look forward to seeking out coverage for the entire family. And it's also nice because we've got, we also have people who care for kids that are caregivers, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and they too can have access to that coverage as well.
Now you're based at the University of South Florida in Tampa, but how about statewide? Folks what sort of arrangements do we have if they're in Fort Lauderdale or Palm Beach or in Apalachicola, say? How do they get the assistance?
So the nice thing about what we've done in Florida is we've created a very strong network of community-based partners that are trained to do this enrollment assistance. We have a few that have received grants from Florida Healthy Kids to do outreach and enrollment. A couple of them are based in the school system. But we have programs in Fort Lauderdale, in Orange County, in Pensacola, in Miami-Dade, in very rural areas like Clay County and Baker County. So while I couldn't tell you that every single county in the state has an organized outreach partner, we've covered the majority of the state with partners that can reach almost any family that needs assistance.
Well, I think that this is a marvelous program, and certainly people need to be aware of it. Again, that website is floridakidcare.org, and we presume the folks can find all the information you've been talking about and then some just by going to that website.
Yes.
And before you go, we want to congratulate you. We see here that you won a $1 million grant from the federal government to expand your outreach. So congratulations on getting that.
Thank you very much.
Jodi Ray is the project director, Florida Covering Kids and Families. She's based at the University of South Florida, but this is a statewide program, floridakidcare.org. Jodi, thank you so much for explaining all of this to us today. And we do trust that you will come back a few months from now and give us an update, and we'll make this an ongoing awareness and appreciation of the work that you find folks are doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Happy to.
You're listening to the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And our conversation continues following these messages. From Pensacola, Key West, and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And a pleasure having Jodi Ray on with us. You know, I remember, and I kind of date myself, after the passing of Governor Lawton Childs, his wife Rhea got all involved, and we saw this creation of the Lawton and Rhea Childs Center for Healthy Mothers and Babies. And she was quite activist, and it really is nice to know that they are doing well and that there's a statewide outreach program for this. It's very, I suppose you could say it follows one of the first rules of politics: always be strong for something nobody can be against. And I don't know anybody that's against babies and children or mothers, so you know.
At least they won't admit to it publicly, Reagan,
right?
I guess.
Right.
But
they're doing a fine job.
See, and I didn't know. I saw Jodi Ray we were going to interview. I thought we were interviewing somebody about cooking or something. You know, sounds like a cooking host. But no, it was nice to have. No, all kidding aside, it was nice to have Jodi Ray on.
Yeah, good job. All right, well,
let's turn our attention to national issues. You know, we had Representative Alan Grayson on a few weeks ago.
Right.
He was speaking. One of the things he did was vote to end the NSA spying program, which he and I agree, and I believe you agree on as well, is a breach of the Fourth Amendment. I don't care how you want to package that; it's still going to be throwing away the Fourth Amendment in my book. So I was watching Face the Nation on Sunday, and they happened to have on General Michael Hayden, former CIA and NSA director. Oh, yeah, he's going to give you the straight scoop, right? And, of course, unfortunately, Bob Schieffer kind of threw him some softballs. So basically they're saying that it's not spying, that everything's hunky-dory in NSA land. Remember, the NSA was never charged with collecting data on Americans. That was never its part of its formation.
Right.
It was to work with the CIA in gathering foreign intelligence, mainly against the former Soviet Union. They have expanded their powers, and in conjunction are popping holes left and right into the Fourth Amendment. And you and I are not going to stand there and let that happen. Of course, Bob Schieffer, I don't know why he wasn't more forceful with him, but that's something that we should look at.
Yeah.
Also, they had a couple of representatives on. They had Dutch Ruppersberger from Maryland. They also had one of the guys that I think's a little bit cuckoo, Peter King from New York. And, of course, these guys were also saying how NSA employees are patriots and this is not spying. And I just don't believe them, Reagan. I simply don't believe these guys and what they're saying. Your take?
Historically, I think it's the same kind of outgrowth in this reaction to 9/11. Even though we've passed several years now, we saw it after the American Revolution. We saw it in the administration of John Adams. We saw it in the Civil War with Lincoln. We saw it in World War I with Woodrow Wilson. We saw Franklin Roosevelt do it in World War II. We've always managed to kind of step back from that. And here we are after 9/11 doing it again. And the difference, of course, being now we have all of this electronic gobbledygook that does it so much better, and we don't even know it. I'm not sold on all of it. I'm like you, I think we need to step back.
I'm extremely skeptical about these programs. I think that they do encroach on our Fourth Amendment rights. And, of course, once you start throwing amendments out, then what good is the Constitution, Reagan?
Well, and I guess a part of that point is that if people don't pay attention, those who would alter the Constitution or put limits on many of your rights, they just kind of nick away, nibble, a piece here, a piece there. And all of a sudden you get up one morning and you've lost a lot of your rights. And you say, well, how did that happen? We're not paying attention. And they did it saying, oh, no, you're not being hurt.
This is such an important bill. Of course, there was a big wrangle in Congress. It was a very close vote. I believe it was 215 to 204 to try to get rid of this program, but the program will continue. That's a very close vote.
Yes,
and you had a lot of Republicans who normally are against overreaching government voting to keep it. Now, the reason why, according to Alan Grayson, was fear.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. I think there is that fear factor, which is still permeating. I like to term it now as not to denigrate anything about 9/11, but it's the 9/11 card that keeps getting played. 9/11 happened, but getting rid of our Fourth Amendment rights with spying programs is not going to forestall another 9/11. There are other ways to gather intelligence that do not encroach on Americans' rights that can also prevent another 9/11. Whenever I hear guys like Peter King use the term 9/11 about 6-7 times during and he was wearing a little 9/11 pin with the Twin Towers to stress the point. This has all become politics, Reagan. It's the politics of fear. It's something that I abhor because once you start going down to the politics of fear, well, reason really goes out the window, doesn't it?
And that was my purpose in outlining a lot of those historical aspects. Sure, there was a lot of fear. The government allocated power to itself, but we always managed to come back and step away from that. Now, let me hasten to add that Al and I are not saying that radical Islamists have gone away, that they are not a threat anymore. They still are out there, and they still hate us. There is no question about that. This is why the president temporarily closed a lot of our embassies here a couple of weeks back, because of the notion that there was going to be physical harm done. Those people are still going to hate us. The question is, how do we guard against it, and to what extreme?
And not only that, and I agree with you, Reagan, yes, the threat is still there. But what I'm saying is when you keep repeating the threat over and over again to keep people in a state of fear, they're going to want to give up their rights. And once you give up your rights, well, isn't that the whole point of the terrorists?
Right.
Anyway, wasn't it to get rid of our rights?
Yeah.
That's why they created these acts.
Yeah.
Terrorism, the creating fear through acts of violence. Well, if you're good at creating fear through acts of violence, and we're willing to throw away the Constitution, that's what we're doing in no uncertain terms. They could spin it any way they want, these politicians. They're very good at it. But when you start throwing away the bedrock of America, not to be overdramatic, but that's what's happening, then where do you go from there? And there are other ways to combat terrorism without destroying the Constitution.
And frankly, the folks that we have put in charge of these things over the years have never been horribly good at, they had radar at Pearl Harbor. And on that Sunday morning, one naval operator spotted the planes and thought it was one of our own returning from standard patrol.
Well, you know the story about, there's a Pearl Harbor story. He reported it to his supervisor. The supervisor said, ignore it.
Yeah.
It's nothing.
And
now, was he told to say to ignore it? Did we expect that attack? There are various theories that say we did expect that attack and we let it happen. The Trump up to the Vietnam War, that was already admitted that the Gulf of Tonkin incident did not happen, but It was a prelude to war. I'm saying that just because the government says it and puts talking heads up wearing suits is not necessarily you should believe it without asking any questions. That's the whole point we're trying to make. That's why it's good to have a debate about this issue, and people need to keep talking about it. Because if it was such a big program that didn't infringe on anyone's rights, why was it a secret program that nobody really knew about?
Well, and there you are, and I have to question how good they are at running these things in the first place. Are we being overwhelmed by minutia that is, how much of it? 98, 99% irrelevant? I mean, our technology today is so great, but how many thousands of people are employed in doing this, and how well do they talk to each other? I don't know. Do we get our money's worth out of it, even when you still object to it,
And in finality on this subject, Edward Snowden, to me, is a patriot, unorthodox as his methods were. And to call him a defector, as General Michael Hayden did, and to call him other words, doesn't take away from the act. He gained nothing from that. In fact, he lost quite a bit. He's living in Russia now. And so he gave up a lot. He gave up a job. He gave up his girlfriend. He gave up his high lifestyle in order to bring this forward. So I applaud him.
Well, we'll see what happens. Mr. Putin has now given him a year, and his father is now out there campaigning on his behalf, and obviously there's another chapter of that to be written just yet, so we shall see where it goes. Tell you what, let us take a pause along the network line. We'll remind folks that this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And we'll continue our conversation following these messages. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And we trust you know who you are. We do say thank you for the pleasure of your company this day.
It depends on how much I've drank the night before. Sometimes I really don't know who I am.
I forgot who I was one time for 3 days, Al. And if I had been smart, I could have looked at my driver's license and said, yes, that's who you are, but I didn't. So.
We're multifaceted guys, Reagan. It's hard to keep track of who we are. This was an interesting story. The resignation of Tony Bennett. No, not the popular singer of America's songbook.
No. Who just recently turned 87, by the way. Congratulations to him.
Happy birthday to Tony. Still going strong.
Yeah.
The last of the old crooners.
Yeah.
No, this is former state education commissioner Tony Bennett. I think he only served about, 7 months?
Or less.
He stepped down on August 1st. Now, this is a setback for Jeb Bush, because Jeb Bush was in his corner. He loved the guy, and they just thought each other was great. The thing about Tony Bennett and why he was appointed, and why we shouldn't appoint our education commissioners, that was changed via a amendment a few years back, and we should have another amendment to change that, in my opinion, is because you have these commissioners appointed with agendas. Tony Bennett's agenda is to privatize our school system. And the problem with that, obviously there's a lot of problems. We won't go into a big debate about it right now, but the problem with Mr. Bennett was he changed a grade on a private school at his previous job.
In Indiana.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because that lady who ran the school gave him a very large contribution. So, of course, ethical considerations came into view, and Mr. Bennett was decided to leave his post and go somewhere else and try to wreak some havoc somewhere else. But the political fallout is what I wanted to talk about. What this will mean for Jeb Bush.
Well, let's start before you even go into that.
Yeah.
I don't think that it was generally known, certainly not widely known, that the former governor lobbied very hard to get Tony Bennett to come here. I never heard a word about Jeb Bush having input on this. The only thing I had heard was that Rick Scott was going to appoint him. So now comes the story that Mr. Bush was heavily involved in the lobbying that brought this appointment about.
And I have to tell you, I didn't know either. It wasn't exactly reported widely about the Bush connection.
No, it was not.
Jeb Bush is trying to position himself as the education guy presently. And so, of course, that cause celeb in the GOP now is get rid of public schools and have everybody have choice to take private schools, which would decimate the public school system. And we'd end up with a tiered system, one geared for the very wealthy and then one geared for everyone else, which I'm not really thinking is a very good idea. Because I'll tell you something, it takes away the rest of... You think upward mobility is being decimated right now among lower and middle classes. Wait till they change the school system, if that so happens, which I hope it doesn't. Because then you'll have the two-tiered system where everyone else is kept down and then only the rich get the benefits of the good education.
And I couldn't help but think about this. Just about every president since Lyndon Johnson has said, I'm going to be the education president.
Yes.
And generally what that boils down to, and what it means, is how much money is the federal government going to give my local district?
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm of the opinion, Reagan, that schools should be handled on a local level. I do agree with Republicans that schools should be. It shouldn't be there shouldn't be a federal office of education and all this. There shouldn't be all these standardized tests. I don't agree with No Child Left Behind. I think our children are getting tested more and more over basically, they're not learning to think critically like our generation was. They're learning to complete tests, and they're bogged down with huge amounts of homework. And I think the stress on education has changed from critical thinking, learning skills, learning to be a productive citizen, learning civics, to learning enough math and social sciences and English to pass these FCATs.
Wrote memory and memorized just long enough to spit it up back on the test and then promptly forget about it.
Yes.
From my point of view, I wonder if there any critical thinking going on at all. Duh.
I think in some of the better schools, but I think most of these schools are afraid now because if they don't keep their so-called grades up, because this federal program, this A through F thing, I don't like the idea. But remember, this is Bush's idea, the grading schools A to F.
Well, and unless you try these things, you don't know whether they're going to work or not.
I think they haven't worked.
The people were convinced that the system before that was going to help.
Well, this is a stigma. Look, you get a school with a stigma of an F, it's going to make people look twice at the school. Are they providing education? Okay, I understand the benefits, but also you start stigmatizing schools. I mean, this doesn't create an environment that's learning focused. It creates an environment of fear where you're afraid you're going to lose a grade.
Well, and not to let the point slip because you made it, and a lot of it being done at the expense of the civic education of young people today.
Not only that, but music,
senior high school.
Music education, physical. Look at the children are fatter than ever. Physical PA. We used to have all that stuff. We had gym. All of this is going by the wayside because of the fear of these FCATs. And there has to be a better way. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll leave it right there then, and we'll pause again along the network line, reminding folks that they're listening to the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
We'll be back with a closing thought following these messages. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And this hour went flying by, didn't it, huh?
Absolutely. All kinds of stuff was covered. I wanted to announce something, and now that it's in the works and is official, we are now going to be on television.
Aha.
That new medium that we thought wouldn't last.
Yes.
WHDO, Harry David Oxford in Tampa, Channel 38 on the air signal, HD signal, will be airing us. We are also going to be on YouTube. More information on that forthcoming as far as times and so forth. But keep an eye out because you'll be seeing Reagan's and my mug. A smug mugs
and we hope
on TV.
We hope that your viewing capability doesn't crack or something like that when they try to get our picture up there. And if you hear somebody yelling makeup in the background, we don't do that anymore.
And you're probably wondering why on earth would anyone want to put us on television? Well, the reason is we're not sure. But we're trying to build a television network of stations around Florida, airing Florida Roundtable as a public affairs and information program. And so the first station will be WHDO. We also have a station that's going to be signing up early next year in Port St. Lucie. So we are slowly going to build a television network so that we can inform you not only with our voices, but with our lovely images as well.
And while we got a couple of seconds, let me just remind folks that over the years, one of the underlying premises of this program is when we have a guest, that Al and I try to allow the guest to do the majority of the talking. This is not confrontation radio, okay? We don't fight with people here. We don't try to embarrass them. We let them have their say, and we leave it to you, the audience, to decide whether you like what they had to say or not. So there you
That's
are.
what we like to stress as well. I'm
right.
totally in agreement.
Time for us to run away, Al. It's done. The clock says we need to get out of here, so we'll say thank you for your time this day. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
We'll see you again next week.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.